There are two pairs of boots on a shelf. One is $45, one is $200. You have $60 in your account, and it's the 11th of the month. You take the $45 boots. Obviously. There is no decision here. There's nothing to decide with. A choice requires at least two things you can afford, and you have one. And that purchase, right there, is going to cost you $240,000, not the boots, the habit. Because you're going to make that exact decision, in that exact position, several thousand more times over the next 30 years, on a car, a mattress, a washing machine, an apartment, an insurance policy, your own teeth. And every single time, you will be right. Every time, given what's in your account on that specific day, the cheap option is the correct call. That's what makes this different from every other money story you've heard. There's no mistake in this video. There's no moment where you're weak or stupid or undisciplined. You do everything right for 30 years, and it costs you $250,000. That's worth stopping on for a second, because it's the opposite of what a video like this normally does. Usually there's a villain, and the villain is you, the coffee, the impulse, the thing you should have known better than to buy. Not here. Go through this entire 30 years with a red pen and try to find the purchase you'd overturn. There isn't one. Every line is defensible. The sum is a disaster. Here's the part that should genuinely bother you. You're not going to spend less money. That's the thing everyone gets backwards. Buying the cheapest option is not a way of spending less. Over 30 years you will spend more, $54,000 more, for worse versions of the same things. And you'll do it without ever borrowing a dollar. No credit card, no loan, no payday lender. You'll be proud of that, and you'll be paying 21% interest the entire time, and nobody will ever tell you because there's no paperwork. That's what this actually is. It's a loan. The cheapest option is the most expensive credit available to a human being. It's the only kind you can get with no capital and no signature, and we don't call it borrowing. We call it being careful. 30 years. One man. The left-hand option, every single time. Let's start with the boots. You're 25, you take the $45 boots. They're fine. That's important. They're genuinely fine. They're not garbage. They're boots. They keep water out mostly for a while. They last about a year. Then the sole goes soft and starts letting the wet through, and there's a stretch of about 6 weeks where your feet are cold and you're not replacing them yet because you've got other things going on. Then you buy another pair, $45. And the 6 weeks matter more than the boots do. 6 weeks of arriving somewhere with wet feet, 6 weeks of sitting through a shift in socks that didn't dry. It's not a catastrophe. It's not a story you'd tell anyone. It's just a small, grinding, constant reduction in the quality of being alive. And you'll have it every 12 months for 30 years. And the other man will never have it once. Do that for 30 years, and you spend $1,350 on boots. The $200 boots last 8 years. They can be resoled. Over 30 years, that man buys 4 pairs and spends $750. So he's got dry feet for 3 decades, and he paid $600 less than you. Now run the actual mechanics of what happened, because this is the engine of the entire video, and everything after it is just this, scaled up. On the day you stood at that shelf, you avoided $155. That's the whole gap. $155 you did not have. Over the next 7 years, you paid $315 in replacement boots that the other man didn't pay. So you kept $155 and you paid back $315, slowly, in installments. That is a loan, not a metaphor for a loan. Structurally, mathematically, a loan. Run the interest rate on it. It's 21.7%. That's a credit card. You just took out a credit card on footwear at the exact rate the bank would have charged you, except the bank at least has to print the number on a statement. You didn't borrow money, you borrowed dryness, and you're paying it back at 22% for the rest of your life. And there's no way to refinance it. That's the thing about this particular loan. A real debt you can consolidate or negotiate or default on. This one has no counterparty. There's nobody to call. It just runs silently in the background of your life, repricing itself every time something wears out. And the only way to pay it off is to produce $155 on a day when you don't have it. Now let me kill the obvious objection because you've already got it. This is not buy expensive things. That's a completely different video, and it's a stupid one. There are $600 boots on that same shelf, and they're a scam. They're not 3 times better than the 200s. Past a certain point, you're buying a logo. There's a real number here, and it's cost per year. The 45s cost $45 a year. The 200s cost $25 a year. The 600s cost $60 a year because they're a fashion object. The cheapest option and the best option are 2 different things, and there's a window between them where the actual value lives. And the entire tragedy of this video is that you can see that window perfectly clearly, you understand it completely, and you cannot reach it because reaching it requires $155 on the 11th of the month. Knowing is not the problem, it's never the problem. You know, you've always known. That's what makes the advice so unbearable when it arrives, because it always arrives. Somebody will absolutely tell you to buy quality. It'll save you money in the long run. They're right. They're completely right. They've correctly identified the entire mechanism, and they've set it to a man holding $60, and there's nothing he can do with the information except feel it. You're 27. You need a car. You buy the $4,000 one because you have about $4,000, and cars that cost $16,000 are for other people, and it runs for a while. Then it's the alternator. Then it's something with the brakes, and the guy says it's borderline, but he wouldn't drive his family in it. Then it's the transmission making a noise that you start turning the radio up to cover, which is a thing people actually do. And if you've done it, you know exactly which noise I mean. It averages out to about $230 a month, forever. Not in a straight line. That's the cruel part. It's nothing for 4 months, and then it's $900 on a Wednesday. And the $900 on a Wednesday is the thing that eats you, because you don't have $900 on a Wednesday. You have it on the 15th. So you're on the phone with a mechanic negotiating a timeline. You're getting driven to work by someone who's very nice about it, and you can hear the tiny thing in their voice. You're missing a shift. You're paying a late fee on something unrelated because the transmission ate the money that was going to that. And the late fee is $35, and the late fee has nothing to do with the car. If you tracked your spending that month, and you might, you're careful, you're the kind of man who tracks it. The $35 would land under whatever the bill was. It would never touch the car. Half the cost of that car is filed in your own records under other things entirely. The car is not just costing you money. The car is generating events. And each event costs money somewhere else in a place you'd never attribute back to a $4,000 car. You replace it every 4 years because that's what a $4,000 car does. Over 30 years, that's 7.5 cars, $30,000, plus $82,000 in repairs, $112,000. The man with the $16,000 car keeps it 12 years. He spends $75 a month on maintenance because it's oil changes and tires, and that's it. Over 30 years, he buys 2.5 cars and spends $67,000. He's $45,000 ahead, and he's never once turned up the radio to cover a noise. And if you asked him about it, he'd have almost nothing to say. He doesn't think about his car. That's the entire product. There's no story there, no mechanic he's got a relationship with, no Wednesday he remembers. 30 years of your life had a recurring character in it who never appeared in his at all. And notice what he actually bought with that 16,000. Not luxury. He bought predictability. He bought the removal of the Wednesday. He bought a life where car expenses are a line item instead of an ambush. And you cannot put a price on that. Except we just did. And it's $45,000. That's the second thing the cheapest option takes. And it's worse than the money. It takes your ability to plan. You can't build anything on top of a life where $900 can happen on a Wednesday. Every plan you make has a hole in the bottom of it. And you can feel that, which is why you stop making them. Not consciously, you just gradually become a man who doesn't book things in advance, who's non-committal about the thing in April, who says, let's see closer to the time. People think that's your personality. It's not your personality. It's a $4,000 car, expressing itself through a man. You're 31. The washing machine, $260 secondhand off a listing. It works for about 3 years and then it doesn't. And in between, there's a whole ecosystem of small costs nobody counts. The month it half works and you're at a laundromat on Sundays. The load it destroyed. The 4 hours you spent on it with a video paused on your phone. Over 30 years, at 3 years a machine, that's 10 machines. $2,600 plus the laundromat months, which come to about $3,000 more. The $850 machine lasts 14 years. 2 of them covers you for 30, $1,800, and it never once sends you to a laundromat. You spent $3,600 more than him to save $590 on a Tuesday in your 30s. Effective interest rate on that one, 27%. And notice you'd never have accepted that from a lender. Nobody in this story would. If a man in a shop had said, I'll knock $590 off today and you'll pay me back $3,600 over 30 years, you'd have walked out. You'd have told people about him. You'd have known instantly exactly what he was. That's worse than a credit card. You could have put the good washing machine on a Visa at 24% and come out ahead. Read that sentence again. The responsible thing. The thing you did. The thing your parents would have told you to do was mathematically worse than credit card debt. That's not a rhetorical flourish. That's arithmetic. And it's the arithmetic that governs the bottom third of the income distribution, and almost nobody who's never lived there believes it. And that's why the advice never fits. Every piece of financial guidance ever written is written for a man with a buffer. It assumes you're choosing between options, and its whole job is to help you choose well. But choosing isn't the bottleneck down here. There's one option. The advice is a very detailed, very correct map, handed to a man who isn't allowed to move. You're 34. The apartment. There's one closer in, and there's one further out. And the one further out is $200 a month cheaper, so you take the one further out. Obviously, and it costs you 80 minutes a day. Now the 80 minutes doesn't show up anywhere. There's no line on any statement, but run it. 80 minutes a day, 5 days a week, is 320 hours a year. That's 8 working weeks. You're working 8 extra weeks a year unpaid to save $2,400. That's about $7 an hour. You are functionally taking a second job at $7 an hour and paying for it with your evenings. And the gas and the mileage eat about half the $200 anyway, so it's more like $7 an hour to save $1,200, which is $350 an hour, which is not a wage. That's a hostage situation. But here's what actually happens in those 80 minutes, and it isn't about money at all. You don't cook because you get home at 7:15. So you buy food, which costs money. You don't go to the gym. You don't see the friend. You don't do the course, or the side thing, or the certification that would move you off this rung entirely. The cheap apartment didn't just take $2,400. It took the raw material you'd need to stop being the guy who needs the cheap apartment. That's the difference between a cost and a trap. A cost takes money. A trap takes the specific thing you'd have used to escape it. And the cheapest option at every single rung of this video has been quietly doing the second one, taking the hours, the slack, the attention, the $900 on a Wednesday that was going to be the start of something. That's the loop closing. That's how it holds people, not with a wall, with an exchange rate that's just bad enough that you can never accumulate the thing you'd need to change the exchange rate. Your teeth. Cleanings are $160 twice a year, $320 for something that isn't hurting. So you don't. Nobody thinks of that as buying the cheapest option, but it is. It's the cheapest option on your own body. And every 7 years or so, it's a root canal and a crown, and that's $2,600, and it is hurting now. And it's on a Wednesday, and you don't have $2,600 on a Wednesday. Over 30 years, $11,000 of emergency dentistry versus $9,600 of maintenance you didn't do. The money's close. The money's almost a wash. That's not the point. The point is what you bought with the difference. 4 root canals. You bought 4 separate weeks of your life in real pain, plus the 2 weeks of pretending it's fine before each one, plus the specific misery of doing the thing you knew you'd have to do eventually, later, at 3 times the price, in a chair, at 38. You didn't save money on your teeth. You just paid in a currency that doesn't show up on a bank statement, and that's true of the whole ledger if you're honest about it. The wet feet. The radio turned up, the Sundays at a laundromat, the 80 minutes. None of it is money. All of it is the actual texture of 30 years of a human life. And it was all bought at a discount by a man who was being careful with his money. Insurance. This is the one that ends people. You take liability only. It's $34 a month cheaper. Over 30 years, that's $12,000 you keep. And honestly, for long stretches, you win. Years go by. You're up. And then a thing happens in an intersection that takes 4 seconds. $7,500, which you do not have, which becomes a credit card at 24%, which becomes a minimum payment, which becomes a thing that follows you for 6 years. It happens twice in 30 years, $15,000. And here's what nobody tells you about the years where you win. The years where nothing happens and you're up on the deal, those are the years that teach you the lesson. Every quiet year is evidence that you were right. So you get more confident in the position, not less, right up until the intersection. The strategy trains you to trust it, and it's most convincing about 4 seconds before it isn't. That's the shape of the whole thing right there. The cheapest option isn't a small, steady drip. It's a small, steady drip that occasionally opens up into a hole you can't climb out of. And the hole always arrives on a Wednesday, and you're always alone in it. You're 55. Let's count it. Across boots, the cars, the machines, the teeth, the insurance, you spent $148,000. The other man, same job, same salary, same everything. Buying the second cheapest option instead of the cheapest, spent $94,000. You spent $54,700 more than him for worse versions of every single thing. That's $152 a month for 30 years that you paid extra for the privilege of being broke. And he didn't burn his 152. He put it in an index fund because he had $152 a month of slack because he wasn't buying boots every 12 months. At 7% over 30 years, that's $185,000. So the ledger is $54,000 you overpaid plus $185,000 he compounded, $240,000. And notice you cannot point to the moment it left. There's no purchase in this video that cost you $250,000. There's no signature, no bad night, no thing you'd take back. It went out in $45 pieces on ordinary afternoons, correctly, one at a time, for 3 decades. Same salary, same discipline, same intelligence. You never bought anything you didn't need. He drove one car for 12 years, and you drove 7. And he's $250,000 ahead, and if anybody ever asks him, he'll say he was just sensible with money. So what actually separated you? Not discipline. This is where every version of this story goes wrong. So let's be exact. You were not undisciplined. You were the most disciplined man in this video. He bought a $16,000 car. You bought a $4,000 car. He spent $200 on boots. You spent $45. At every single decision point, you were the one who spent less. You were more frugal than him at every step of a 30-year race. And you finished $250,000 behind. You weren't bad with money. You were undercapitalized. Those two things look identical from the outside. They produce the same bank balance, the same car, the same boots. And they are not remotely the same thing, and almost every piece of financial advice ever written cannot tell them apart. Because here's what he actually had that you didn't. It wasn't willpower, and it wasn't a higher income. It was $155 on the day of the boots. $12,000 on the day of the car, $590 on the day of the washing machine. Add up every gap in this entire video, every single moment where he went right and you went left. And it's $14,500. And if you take the car out of it, it's $2,593. $2,593 at 25 is the entire difference between these two lives. And he probably didn't earn it. Let's be honest about where a buffer comes from at 25. It's a parent. It's a grandmother who died. It's a spare room that meant rent was $200 instead of $900 for a year. The $2,593 is almost never a product of character. It arrives, usually from a family, usually unremarked, and it purchases a permanent structural advantage that the receiver will spend the rest of his life attributing to his own good sense. Not a mindset, not a work ethic, a buffer, a specific, small, boring amount of money sitting in an account on the day the soul goes soft. That's what the buffer actually is, and nobody ever explains it this way. A buffer isn't savings. Savings is money you're accumulating. A buffer is a tool. It's the thing that gives you access to the cost per year column instead of the price tag column. It's not the reward for being good with money. It's the equipment you need to be able to be good with money at all, which means frugality is a luxury good. You have to be able to afford to be thrifty. Buying the $200 boots is not the poor man's move. It's the move of a man with $200. The poor man buys the 45s correctly and pays 22% for it, forever, and gets called irresponsible by people who have never once stood at that shelf on the 11th of the month. And the loan is invisible. That's the last piece. If you'd walked into a bank at 25 and they'd offered you $155 at 21.7%, you'd have laughed. You'd have known exactly what that was. But nobody offered it to you. There was no form. Nobody said the number out loud. It came as a shelf with 2 boxes on it and a version of you who was proud of taking the cheaper one. You never borrowed $1 in your life. You were in debt the entire time. And being proud of that, being proud of never borrowing, was itself part of the mechanism. It kept you from looking. A man who knows he's in debt at 22% is a man who might do something drastic about it. A man who thinks he's being careful just goes back to the shelf. So go back to the shelf. 25 years old, $60, the 11th of the month, 2 boxes. Take the 45s. You have to. There is no other move. That's the whole point. That's what makes it a trap instead of a mistake. Just understand what you're signing, because there's no rate printed on the box and no statement coming, and nobody in your life is ever going to say the words out loud. It's not that you bought cheap boots, it's that being broke costs money, more money than being comfortable does. And you'll pay it every month for 30 years, in installments, on time, without ever missing one.